Hi everyone, this is Elaine. Welcome to Flat Earth for Dummies 101. Definition of dummy, indoctrinated in globe from birth. A spinning globe is only true in fairy tales. Only the truth will set you free. The lies were out to get me, to feast upon my brain. Free Masonic wormholes were to blame. Then I saw the way. Now I'm a flat earther. There is no curve, no globe in my mind. The earth is flat. We're the believers, don't eat the deceivers, those who lie.
This is a map of tidal amplitude, which is the difference between the low and the high tide in a given place. So what that means is that the low tide might be a meter below sea level, and the high tide might be a meter above sea level, and that would be a tidal amplitude of 2 meters, which is considered very high. And those high tidal amplitudes are here in red. So this is where the difference between the low tide and the high tide is the greatest. What you'll notice with this is that there are places where the tidal amplitude is very, very low. It's actually 0. And those are the places here in pink. In these places, there is no tide. Low tide is the same as high tide. What that translates to is 0 tidal amplitude. So every place in pink has 0 tide. Now, the places where there is no tide, these are called amphidromic points. I will call them tidal nodes because that's the more commoner term for them. And they're here. And these are the places, these points, that there is no tide. Literally no tide at all. And there's tons of them. Now, the greatest density of these that I have seen is in the polar sea. Now, this is a polar projection map. This is a favorite by flat earthers. And you can see how many of these nodes are in the Arctic Sea. This is the Arctic Sea up here, the North Polar Sea. You can see all the nodes in here. I'm just circling them all. These are places with no tide. This is just a zoom in on that so you can see. It's almost fractal how this looks because you've got all these little nodes here and then you've also got all big nodes all in the sea. Oh, that's where the purples are. These big tidal nodes. These seem to be the center of what's going on with the tides. So this is a better map, a more detailed map of the tidal nodes, and it shows another tidal node with this arrow around New Zealand. So New Zealand's another example of a tidal node that's not under the ocean but still seems to affect the tides. And what I mean by affect the tides is you can see this arrow. Tides revolve around tidal nodes. So a high tide seems to be a bulge of water that will revolve in a certain direction, and it looks like the direction is different in these different nodes. There's clockwise and there's anti-clockwise, but it has nothing to do with the equator because this one you can see here is clockwise. This one you can see is counterclockwise. This one you can see is also clockwise. And this one here is counterclockwise, and there's really no pattern to whether it's going to be clockwise or counterclockwise. This shows a live animation of the tides, and you can see exactly what I mean when I say that tides revolve around the nodes. So I told you about those 2 nodes up here in Hudson's Bay. You can see the high tide in red revolving around the coast of Hudson's Bay. You can also see this in New Zealand, which I told you was an on-land tidal node. You can see this high tide in red spinning around New Zealand, and the low tide in blue, so negative tide, also spinning around New Zealand. And they almost look like magnetic fields in the way that this is pictured here around New Zealand. This is from the Wikipedia article on tidal nodes, and it's extremely sparse. There's very, very little information about what these are and what they do. There's a line about how the moon causes them, but it's frankly laughable that people can think, after looking at tidal nodes and how tides react around tidal nodes, that the moon is doing this. It's this joke of an animation here on the bottom right that does not correspond whatsoever with the models I've shown you, as well as this one on the top where you have a bulge both on the moon side and on the non-moon side, and nothing on the top or bottom, even though we know that there's a great deal of tide in the southern part and in the northern part of what would be this map here. There's also a list of tidal nodes on Wikipedia. The set of clockwise points include these, but they've only given us 16 nodes here, but from what I saw from the map, there's 100 of these things. It could be 100. I haven't even counted them. There's so many of these tidal nodes all over the earth, but in some places they are in far greater density than in other places. The speculation that everybody accepts, and that's that the moon is causing the tides. And for this to be the consensus, the scientific consensus, is extremely embarrassing. It is extremely embarrassing to me that this is the best that science can give us. And this is a model of what the tides would look like if it was the moon. And this is on YouTube as, in fact, what the tides do. But this is nothing like what I've shown you in this presentation. This is pure fantasy.
I thought the globe was more or less a given thing. The more I saw, the more was fake. Was the moon a junkyard, the ISS a sham? When I wanted answers, I got spam. Then I saw the way. Now I'm a flat earther. There is no curve, no globe in my mind. The earth is flat. We're the believers, don't eat the deceivers, those who lie.
Newton theorized, and it is now commonly taught, that the Earth's ocean tides are caused by gravitational lunar attraction. If the Moon is only 2,160 miles in diameter, and the Earth 8,000 miles, however, using their own math and law, it follows that the Earth is 87 times more massive, and therefore the larger object should attract the smaller to it, and not the other way around. If the Earth's greater gravity is what keeps the Moon in orbit, it is impossible for the Moon's lesser gravity to supersede the Earth's gravity at Earth's sea level, where its gravitational attraction would even further out-trump the Moon's. Not to mention, the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and should therefore exert a uniform influence on the Earth's tides, when in actuality, the Earth's tides vary greatly. Furthermore, if ocean tides are caused by the Moon's gravitation, how is it that lakes, ponds, and other smaller bodies of standing water remain outside the Moon's grasp, while the gigantic oceans are so affected? Thomas Winship wrote, "If the Moon lifted up the water, it is evident that near the land the water would be drawn away and low instead of high tide caused. Again, the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and it follows that if she exerted any influence on the Earth, that influence could only be a uniform influence. But the tides are not uniform. At Port Natal the rise and fall is about 6 feet, while at Beira, about 600 miles up the coast, the rise and fall is 26 feet. This effectually settles the matter that the Moon has no influence on the tides. Even Sir Isaac Newton himself confessed that the explanation of the moon's action on the tides was the least satisfactory part of his theory of gravitation. This theory asserts that the larger object attracts the smaller, and the mass of the moon being reckoned as only 1/8 of that of the earth, it follows that, if by the presumed force of gravitation the earth revolves round the sun, much more for the same reason should the moon do so likewise, instead of which that wilful orb still continues to go round our world. Tides vary greatly in height, owing chiefly to the different configurations of the adjoining lands. If the moon pulled the tides due to its alleged gravity, then why does it only pull the ocean's water, and not all the world's lakes, marshes, ponds, and other inland waters? The tides are clearly a product of the interconnected ocean waters, and not the other waters of Earth. So in short, what is the cause of the tides? Well, it is clearly not the supposed gravity of the moon, a smaller object than the Earth, far away from the Earth, somehow pulling the tides up in a uniform way, as this doesn't happen. Alternately, it could be, as Samuel Rowbotham proposed, that it is simply the gentle fluctuation of the earth on the waters of the great deep causing the tides. However, this explanation alone fails to provide an answer for the regularity of tides coming in every 6 hours and going out alternately every 6 hours, to which these ancient explorers offer a possible explanation. And this also, curiously, could be why the flight and sailing restrictions at the North Pole, why people like Rodney Clough were turned away when their vessel tried to explore the North Pole. Russian military vessels and other ships explore the area, making sure that we don't take our own independent explorations to the North Polar region. So what are they hiding there? Does this magnetic Mount Meru actually exist? Is there actually a whirlpool spinning around it with 4 directional rivers constantly sucking in and pushing out the waters of the Earth in 6-hour intervals? It sure would be nice if the UN and world governments would allow us to independently explore the Arctic and Antarctic so we could find answers to questions like these.
Hi, this is Elaine Chadwick Clanton, author of Flat Earth for Dummies 101. Join us for Florida Meetup in February of 2019, location to be determined. Contact me with your information and where you are from in Florida. Visit my YouTube channel and please subscribe. This is Flat Earth for Dummies 101, flatearthfordummies101.com. Stay flat.